It was supposed to be a normal family dinner, but the words that came out of Branlon's mouth shattered the peace like a thunderbolt. "Maria, I'm leaving you for someone else," he announced, his tone flat and emotionless. "Here are the divorce papers." I stared at him in disbelief, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath me. Across the table, our children's faces mirrored my shock. Avery's eyes widened in horror, while Grant's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You can't just drop a bombshell like that and expect me to accept it without an explanation." Branlon shrugged nonchalantly, as if he were discussing the weather instead of destroying our family. "I've met someone else, and I want to be with her. It's as simple as that." My hands clenched into fists beneath the table, nails digging into my palms. "How long has this been going on?" I asked through gritted teeth. "A few months," he admitted, his gaze shifting away from mine. "It's Callista, the new girl at the office." I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. Callista was barely out of college, young enough to be his daughter. The realization that my husband had been carrying on an affair with someone half his age made me feel physically ill. "Get out," I hissed, struggling to keep my voice level. "I don't want to see your face in this house ever again." Branlon didn't argue, didn't even try to defend himself. He simply pushed back his chair and stood, gathering his briefcase and jacket. "Mom?" Avery's voice was small, laced with fear. "What's happening?" I forced myself to meet her gaze, swallowing back the lump in my throat. "Your father is leaving us," I said, fighting to keep the bitterness from my words. "But we'll be okay, sweetheart. I promise." As Branlon walked out the door without a backwards glance, I felt a surge of determination rise within me. He might have abandoned us, but I would never let him destroy our family completely. Somehow, someway, I would make him pay for what he'd done. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to fight. For my children, for our future, and for the justice we deserved. The days following Branlon's departure were a blur of shock and humiliation. As the initial sting began to fade, a new emotion took root. Anger, burning hot and fierce within me. It started with the whispers from our neighbors, those pitying glances and half-concealed smirks that spoke volumes. Apparently, Branlon's affair with Callista had been an open secret, the topic of neighborhood gossip for months. "We all knew something was going on," Mrs. Henderson confided with a shake of her head. "The way he'd come home late, dressed up for no reason, well, it was obvious." I wanted to scream, to lash out at her and everyone else who had witnessed my humiliation but said nothing. How could they have let this happen, let me live in blissful ignorance while my life crumbled around me? The worst part was seeing the pain in Avery and Grant's eyes, the confusion and hurt etched onto their young faces. They didn't understand why their father had left, didn't comprehend the depths of his betrayal. "Is Daddy coming back?" Grant asked one night, his small voice wavering. I pulled him close, fighting back tears. "No, honey. Daddy made a choice, and he has to live with it." Avery said nothing, but I could see the anger simmering behind her gaze. At 12 years old, she was old enough to grasp the situation, to realize that our family had been torn apart by deceit and selfishness. As the days turned into weeks, my shock morphed into a simmering rage. Branlon had not only betrayed me, but our entire family. And for what? A fling with some young, naive girl who had no idea the destruction she was causing. It was unforgivable, unacceptable. And as I lay awake at night, staring at the empty space in our bed, I vowed to make him pay for what he'd done. Branlon might have thought he could simply walk away, start a new life without consequence. But I would make sure he faced the consequences of his actions, even if it was the last thing I did. The game was on, and I was playing for keeps. With my anger simmering, I knew I needed to take action. I couldn't let Branlon get away with what he'd done, not just to me, but to our entire family. He needed to face consequences for his actions. That's when I remembered Claire, an old colleague from my corporate communications days. She'd left the company years ago to start her own private investigation firm, and I had a feeling her services might come in handy. I met her at a local cafe, my heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and determination. As soon as she arrived, I cut straight to the chase. "I need your help," I said bluntly. "My husband left me for another woman, and I want to make sure he pays for what he's done." Claire's eyes widened, but to her credit, she didn't look too surprised. "What did you have in mind?" she asked cautiously. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I want you to dig up anything and everything you can on him, his affair, his finances, anything that could be used against him in court or to ruin his reputation." A slow smile spread across Claire's face. "Revenge job. I can definitely help with that." Over the next few weeks, Claire became my silent partner in vengeance. She trailed Branlin and Callista, gathering evidence of their affair, photos, recordings, even receipts from hotels and restaurants they'd visited. But she didn't stop there. Through her connections and investigative skills, she also uncovered evidence of Branlin's professional misconduct, embezzlement, insider trading, you name it. "This guy's dirtier than I thought," Claire remarked one afternoon, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. "If we play our cards right, we can bury him." I flipped through the documents, my heart racing with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation. This was it. The ammunition I needed to bring Branlin down, to make him pay for the pain he'd caused our family. But even as I reveled in the prospect of revenge, a small part of me couldn't help but feel guilty. Was I any better than him, stooping to such underhanded tactics? Was I willing to sacrifice my own morals for the sake of vengeance? I pushed those doubts aside. Branlin had made his choices, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. No matter what it took, I would make sure justice was served. With the evidence Claire had gathered, I knew I had the ammunition I needed to take Branlin down. But I couldn't just burst onto the scene, guns blazing. I needed allies, people who would support me when the truth came out. So I started reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding my support system one conversation at a time. And whenever Branlin's name came up, I carefully planted seeds of doubt, never making outright accusations, but hinting at the depths of his betrayal. "Did you know Branlin left me for some young thing at his office?" I mentioned casually to Allison over coffee one day. "It's just so disappointing, you know? I thought he was a better man than that." Word spread quickly through our social circles, and soon the whispers followed me everywhere I went. People who had once fawned over Branlin now looked at him with suspicion, their admiration tainted by rumors of his infidelity. Even at Avery and Grant's schools, the gossip mills were churning. I overheard moms exchanging hushed conversations at pickup, their voices laced with thinly veiled judgment. "Can you believe what he did to Maria, and with someone so young, too? It's just disgusting." With each conversation, each sidelong glance, I could feel the tides shifting in my favor. Branlin's once sterling reputation was slowly being chipped away, eroded by the steady drip of speculation and innuendo. And all the while, I played the part of the wounded but resilient wife, putting on a brave face for the world. Underneath, though, I was savoring every moment of his downfall, reveling in the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The real fireworks were yet to come. At home, Avery and Grant sensed the change in the air, the subtle shift in how people treated us. They might not have understood the details, but they knew their father was the target of scorn and derision. "Why does everyone hate Dad now?" Grant asked one night, his brow furrowed in confusion. I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. "Your father made some bad choices, honey. Choices that hurt a lot of people, including us, and now he has to deal with the consequences." Avery's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a familiar display of determination. "Good," she said firmly. "He deserves it." In that moment, I felt a surge of pride, not just for my daughter's strength, but for the unity we were forging as a family. We might have been battered and bruised, but we weren't broken. And with each passing day, we grew stronger, more resolved to overcome the challenges ahead. Branlin had made his bed, and soon he would be forced to lie in it. And when that day came, we would be ready. The night of Branlin's big corporate event, I could barely contain my anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been meticulously planning for, the grand finale of my revenge scheme. As I slipped into the hotel ballroom, I scanned the crowd for familiar faces. There was Branlin, looking ever the successful businessman in his tailored suit, schmoozing with colleagues and clients. And by his side, like a trophy on display, was Callista, the woman who had helped destroy my family. Bile rose in my throat at the sight of them together, but I forced it down. This was no time for emotion. I needed to stay focused, to stick to the plan. I found Claire in a secluded corner, her face set in a grim mask of determination. With a subtle nod, she confirmed that everything was in place. The video footage, the documents, all the damning evidence we'd gathered over the past few months. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I made my way to the stage. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to expose Branlin's lies and deceit for all the world to see. When I took the microphone, a hush fell over the crowd. I could see the confusion on their faces, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. What was I doing up here? What could I possibly have to say? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then, with a calm I didn't feel, I began to speak. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maria, and until recently I was married to the man you're all here to honor tonight, Branlin. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but I pressed on, undeterred. I know you all think highly of him, hardworking, dedicated, a real upstanding guy. But what you don't know is that behind closed doors he's been living a lie that has torn my family apart. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Branlin's face drain of color, his eyes widening in panic. You see, for months now, Branlin has been carrying on an affair with a much younger woman, his co-worker, Callista. I gestured towards her, reveling in the shocked gasps that echoed through the room. Not only that, but he's also been engaging in all kinds of unethical and illegal business practices, embezzlement, insider trading, you name it. And I have the evidence to prove it. With a nod to Claire, the damning video footage and documents began to play on the screens behind me. I watched in grim satisfaction as Branlin's world crumbled around him, his precious reputation shredded in front of his colleagues and peers. As security ushered me away, I caught one last glimpse of Branlin's face, a mask of horror and disbelief. In that moment, I knew I had won. He might have thought he could get away with his lies and betrayal, but in the end, karma had caught up with him. And as for me, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The road ahead might be difficult, but at least now I could walk it with my head held high, knowing that justice had been served. In the aftermath of my dramatic public reveal, the legal battles began. I knew Branlin would fight me tooth and nail, so I wasted no time in hiring the best divorce attorney money could buy. As we sat across the table from Branlin and his legal team, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. His eyes burned with a mixture of rage and humiliation, but I met his gaze without flinching. This is going to get ugly, my lawyer Jessica warned me in a low voice. He's not going to go down without a fight. I nodded, steeling myself. I'm ready for whatever he throws at us. He's the one who chose to betray our family. Now he has to face the consequences. True to Jessica's prediction, the proceedings were a bitter, drawn-out affair. Branlin's team tried every trick in the book, dragging my name through the mud and painting me as a vindictive, unhinged ex-wife. But I remained stoic, letting the evidence speak for itself. The video footage, the financial records, it was all there, a damning portrait of Branlin's lies and deceit. And then there was the issue of custody over Avery and Grant. I knew Branlin would fight me on that too, but I was determined not to let him anywhere near my children after the way he'd abandoned them. You can't seriously expect to keep me from seeing my own kids, he snarled during one particularly heated exchange. You lost that right when you walked out on them, I shot back, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. They don't need a father like you in their lives. All you do is hurt them again. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Branlin was ordered to pay a hefty settlement as well as child support and alimony. But more importantly, I was awarded full custody of Avery and Grant. As we left the courthouse that day, I could see the defeat etched on Branlin's face. His reputation was in tatters, his professional life in shambles. He had lost everything, his money, his status, and most importantly, his family. But even as I should have felt triumphant, a part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. This man, who had once been my partner and the father of my children, was now a shell of his former self, brought low by his own hubris and greed. Still, I knew I had done the right thing. Branlin had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. And as for me and my children, We were finally free to start building a new life, one free from his toxic presence. As we drove away from the courthouse, Avery reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly, "for fighting for us." I gave her a watery smile, my heart swelling with pride and love. "Always, honey, no matter what, I'll always fight for you two." In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together as a family. And with our bond stronger than ever, I had no doubt that we would make it through, emerging from the ashes of our old life stronger and more resilient than before. In the weeks following the divorce, Branlin's life unraveled at a dizzying pace. News of his sordid affair and shady business dealings had spread like wildfire, and he found himself a pariah in both his professional and social circles. I watched from afar as he lost his high-paying job, his friends and colleagues turning their backs on him one by one. The once revered executive was now a cautionary tale, a byword for greed and deception. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction at his downfall. After all, he had brought this upon himself with his selfish actions. But another part couldn't help but feel a sliver of pity. This was a man who had once been my partner, my best friend, the father of my children. To see him reduced to such a pitiful state was almost tragic. Almost, but not quite. Whenever that flicker of sympathy threatened to take hold, I reminded myself of the pain he had inflicted upon our family. The humiliation, the betrayal, those wounds ran deep, and no amount of pity could erase them. Still, Branlin seemed determined to cling to the last shreds of our former life. He would call incessantly, leaving rambling voicemails begging for a chance to see Avery and Grant to explain himself. "Please, Maria," he pleaded in one message, his voice thick with desperation. "Let me talk to the kids. They deserve to hear my side of things." I scoffed at his words, anger burning in my chest. His side of things? As if there were any justification for what he had done, any excuse that could possibly make up for abandoning his own children. When I told Avery and Grant about his requests, their reactions were swift and decisive. "I don't want to see him," Avery declared, her jaw set in a familiar display of stubborn determination. "He made his choice when he left us. Why should we give him another chance?" Grant simply shook his head, his eyes downcast. "He's not my dad anymore," he mumbled, and my heart broke anew for the little boy who had once idolized his father. In the end, I chose to respect their wishes. Branlin had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it, alone, without the comfort of his family to soften the blow of his actions. Perhaps, in time, the wounds might heal enough for them to consider forgiving him. But that decision would be theirs, and theirs alone. As for me, I had moved on, focused on building a new life for my little family, one free from the toxicity of Branlin's lies and betrayals. We were survivors, Avery, Grant, and I. Battered and bruised, perhaps, but unbroken. And as we stood united, a fortress against the harsh realities of the world, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them head-on, emerging stronger and more resilient with each obstacle we overcame. Branlin's downfall was complete, but ours was just beginning. A new chapter filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. With the divorce finalized and Branlin well and truly out of our lives, it was time for me, Avery, and Grant to start fresh. We found a cozy new house in a quiet neighborhood, far away from the whispers and judgment of our former community. As we unpacked boxes and settled into our new home, I could feel the weight of the past few months lifting from my shoulders. This was our chance to leave the pain and betrayal behind, to forge a new path forward as a family unit, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were moments when the hurt and anger threatened to resurface, when the echoes of Branlin's deceit would reverberate through our lives like a persistent phantom. One night, as I was tucking Grant into bed, he looked up at me with those big, soulful eyes and asked a question that broke my heart all over again. "Mom, why did Dad leave us? Did we do something wrong?" I pulled him close, fighting back tears as I stroked his hair. "Oh, honey, no, you did nothing wrong. This was all your father's choice and his choice alone. He's the one who turned his back on us, not the other way around." Grant nodded, but I could see the lingering confusion and sadness in his eyes. At 9 years old, he was still too young to fully comprehend the depths of Branlin's betrayal, the cruel selfishness that had torn our family apart. Avery, on the other hand, seemed to have hardened herself against the pain, erecting a protective wall around her emotions. Whenever Branlin's name was mentioned, her expression would grow stony, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and disdain. "He's not my father anymore," she declared one day, her voice laced with a bitterness that broke my heart. "Not after what he did to us." I knew it was her way of coping, of protecting herself from the hurt and abandonment she had felt. And as much as it pained me to see my once vibrant daughter so closed off, I couldn't bring myself to fault her for it. She had every right to be angry, to distance herself from the man who had so callously cast us aside. As for me, I found solace in throwing myself into my work and my children's lives. With Branlin's financial settlement, I was able to take a step back from the corporate grind and focus on rebuilding our little family unit. I enrolled Avery and Grant in new schools, signed them up for extracurricular activities, and made it a point to be present and involved in their lives in a way I hadn't been able to before. We spent weekends exploring our new city, creating new memories to replace the ones tainted by Branlin's betrayal. And slowly, day by day, the wounds began to heal. The hurt never fully went away, but it became easier to manage, to tuck away in the back of our minds and focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. Branlin tried to reach out a few times, leaving tentative voicemails and text messages, but we ignored them. He had made his choice, and we had made ours. To move forward without him, to build a life free from his toxic influence. As the months passed, his attempts grew fewer and farther between, until they stopped altogether, and in their absence, a strange sense of peace settled over our little family. A quiet acceptance that this was our new normal, our fresh start. We had survived the storm of Branlin's deceit, emerging battered but unbroken, and as we stood together, a united front against the world, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them head-on, stronger and more resilient than ever before.